Committee of the Whole is reconvened. We have with us this afternoon, who's joining the panel, Mr. Hiles. Mr. Hiles, could you please introduce yourself for the record?
Yes, hi. I'm Gary Hiles. I'm the Chief Economist at the Guam Department of Labor and here at the invitation of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hiles. With that, the first round was completed. We will begin now the second round, beginning with Senator Jim Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions for this round two. Thank you.
Senator Dueñas.
As well, Mr. Chairman, I had asked all my questions in the first round. Thank you to the panel.
Senator Torres.
I'm all set, Mr. Chair. No further questions.
Senator Nelson.
Mr. Hiles, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hiles, can you please discuss the cause of inflation and what has it done to other areas globally and locally to our island?
I'll try to keep the answer as short as the question. Inflation is caused by a number of things, both on the interaction of supply and demand. On the demand side, demand has expanded recently due to primarily due to the COVID success with vaccinations and reducing restrictions. So people are out spending money and traveling more. And also, including the economic stimulus provided more demand in the economy, along with low interest rates. And on the supply side, while there's more goods and services being demanded, the supply is restricted due to a number of supply chain issues. Some of them are pandemic related, like closures in Shanghai, China. For manufacturing. Some are related to transportation issues, ships lined up at the docks and the ports. And most recently, the Russian invasion in Ukraine has caused a lot of supply chain disruptions, both for fuel and agricultural products, as well as diversions of funds and a great deal of uncertainty. Just last night, I heard that the U.S. Central Bank has taken aggressive measures by increasing the interest rates for the United States, and other central banks in other European countries have taken similar measures, which will raise interest rates and dampen demand, particular because interest rates are higher, so it will be more expensive to invest and purchase housing and things of that nature. For fuel in particular, that's most related to or highly related to the war in Ukraine. The fuel price is somewhat unique in that, from other commodities, in that both the supply and the demand are quite inelastic, which means that if the demand goes up for fuel, that people will still, for the most part, need the same amount and buy the same amount. They can cut back a little, but because they're in the short term, but they can't cut back very much. And the same thing for the supply. If there's a shortage on supply, that they can't increase the supply very much in the short run. So the combination of pressure on the demand side and weakness on the supply side can result in very volatile and dramatic changes in price of gasoline and fuels.
Thank you. And so you specifically mentioned the Russia and Ukrainian war. Can you explain to us the relationship the United States had with Russia in regards to fuel exchange?
The United States has stopped, I believe, imports of fuel from Russia, but that's a very small component of the U.S. Fuel market. But the fuel markets are international, so what's interesting is that although shipments out of Russia may have declined somewhat, that some of them are being diverted to other countries, and they're getting higher prices for the same fuel.
Thank you. And so I'm curious because, as we talk about gas prices and we look to, there are several bills putting a moratorium for an X amount of months to lower the liquid fuel tax. There's another bill, specifically this one, to completely remove the liquid fuel tax. And then there's another one for like another moratorium for 2 years for another tax. And so really, and because the United States is not as reliant holistically, as you mentioned yourself in regards to the fuel exchange, it's a small portion that the United States receives from Russia. And we're looking at how long are we going to anticipate this inflation? How long are we going to, or how long will we continually see the price of gas rise or the price of oil on the barrel? Are we foreseeing that this is going to be an everyday standard of living, or do you see this as a trend that will eventually decline, perhaps as we normalize and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and if in any case the Russian-Ukrainian war ends?
Unfortunately, in the short term, things don't adjust very quickly normally, but in terms of supply, but at these high levels of prices, I would expect additional fuel supplies to come online, but that's a longer term process of months or years.
Okay, thank you. Because we also talk about supply and demand, and several years back, before we entered into COVID, our gas was maybe $3. In some instances, it's dropped below $3. And there was still the same demand. And then COVID happened, and then we were all staying home. So have you done any relative comparison or calculation as far as the supply and demand pre-COVID and the supply and demand today?
No, I haven't, but I would like to distinguish between the things that we might do on Guam to affect the supply and demand basically would be almost minuscule in the world market where the oil prices are determined. With the shutdowns and people working at home, that significantly cut into fuel consumption, so the demand was noticeably reduced, as well as reduced airline flights and other uses of fuel. And
Right.
Weather can play a issue too, especially with electrical and natural gas. The fuel and power use for heating and cooling sometimes has an impact on the market as well, if you have a severe winter or summer.
Have you seen in other government economies, in other countries, and their government are engaging with discussions with the fuel companies to subsidize a portion of the fuel?
I'm not aware of that. I haven't studied this issue. I am aware that some states are looking at similar measures to reduce their fuel taxes.
Okay. So, Mr. Hiles, thank you so much. It's just that we need to understand also the impacts and the activities that are going around our island, just to know exactly how is the relationship here on Guam impacted with our international fuel being brought in or with our stateside fuel being brought in, and to understand the different world economies that could also play a role on how we address some of the challenges that we have here on Guam. And so really, this is discussion. We are discussing the addressing liquid fuel tax. The concern is how do we help the community, our island, with the rising cost of gas, with the rising cost of oil by the barrel. But also the challenge here is the shipment of gas coming in and also our goods. And so this is something that I hope that we can work together to explore, because Guam plays a very small role in this global, in the global scale of things, right? And really what we can control is basically just what is on our island and what we can leverage up at within the house. So I hope that we can move forward with a comprehensive economic assessment on some actions that our government can take to further perhaps subsidize fuel for the people, or instead of just, and understanding really the systemic problem and how long are we going to have to do that, or is this something that we just need to endure and it's going to be the standard moving forward? So that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Nelson. Speaker Talahi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And welcome, Mr. Hiles. I'm getting this from KUAM report that's tracking the 2022 Guam gas price trends. And it shows January going from 489 to 504. In February, it went to 518 all the way to 539. In March, it went from 549 to 594. April, 579 to 589. May, 604 to 619. And in June, 634 to 649. So, Mr. Hiles, do you expect gas prices to go down for the long run in the next 6 months? I don't want to say permanently because nothing's permanent, but for the long run, do you expect this trend to reverse itself and go down?
In the longer run, within a year or years, I would expect a number of things to occur to cause gas prices to decline substantially. That is, increased production of fuel, adjustments in consumer demand through a variety of things, more energy efficient houses, more energy efficient air conditioning, more energy efficient vehicles. People in the long run can transition to cars that require less fuel, a variety of things, living closer to the office, commuting, and so on. But in the short run, not much adjustment will occur. I don't have a forecast for 6 months. I kind of based on often in economics, we look at the trend, and the trend has been increasing. And I'm not aware of any factors that would alter the short-term trend of increasing prices.
Thank you. And so, do you have any estimate of how many households in Guam are consumers of gas? I'm talking gas at the pumps, at a gas station.
I don't, but there's census numbers on the population and number of households, and I would believe most of them, somebody in the household would have one or more cars that would be using gas.
I've been following some of President Biden's efforts because of the rising gas prices, and Congress as well. So some of the things that they've done, like you described, is of course release the reserves, right? So increase that production, urge the increase of production. Of course, we can't control that on Guam. We have no reserves, and we do not produce this gas here. They've also considered similar measures, as you said, to remove the taxes, and they're all over the board on that, for how long they're going to remove these taxes, how much of the taxes they would relieve, but that is a legitimate relief effort that I have seen in the nation, Puerto Rico, and we've seen, I think even today, they are protesting in other countries because of the gas prices, and I do not want to get there. And so this bill is not a silver bullet. It cannot bring down global prices, but it can give a little relief. And this relief might, assist our families, and almost every family, I think, is a consumer of gas. It's going to give them a little relief. And if we can give them a little relief today, that might help them to stay where they are working, stay where they are in their homes, not contribute to all of the other factors, as you also described, that is affecting their standards of living, the cost of living. It's an effort that cannot cure the problem, but it's an effort that is going to bring a little relief. Mr. Byrne, so we discussed earlier, the CRER shows 87.6 million excess in general fund revenues. The general fund revenue projection for FY23, which is the budget that we're going to address in about a month, is about $80 million more than the general fund revenue that was adopted in FY22. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Was any of that $80 million increased revenue budgeted towards, in your proposed budget, towards fuel relief? Or fuel price relief?
I don't believe so.
Are you aware of any additional programming salapit, or the money for, gas vouchers, that is going to be any additional ARP money that would be dedicated to that program, or a new program to affect all of the consumers of gas on Guam without regard to income?
Program Salapi, as you know, we are like 85% through the applications that we've received. It may be that the governor will consider another round. The good thing about what we've done is we now have a database of household income that we've never had before. So if we did decide, or if the governor does decide to issue another payment, that would be really, so far as an administrative task is concerned, a painless task. But I'm not sure a decision has been taken on that yet.
Okay, well, that's always welcome. I would think that ARP money be dedicated for additional relief for gas prices, especially if it can be provided to everyone. Does anything in this bill violate a bond covenant?
Not that I'm aware of.
Pardon?
Not that I'm aware of, Madam Speaker.
I'm sorry, I'm just...
Sorry, my voice may be failing me. Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having Mr. Hiles here. I did want to ask, I know some of my colleagues have already asked you to kind of look into the future, into the crystal ball, but we're seeing gas prices and everything else pretty much going up very quickly. Construction, I mean, it's, and yet, our government, while we have so much revenue coming in from the federal government, we can't spend it fast enough. So how do you foresee and what you're looking at right now and where we're heading? Do you see in the next 6 months, a year, any decreases to prices, or do you think that our businesses here that are able now to sell at a higher price because these are the necessities that people need, they're going to pay what they have to do it? Do you see that continued trend of cost increasing or even staying at this higher level? Because we're certainly seeing consumer goods rise, not by cents, literally by dollars for a single item. And you notice that when you go shopping, the same similar things you're buying for your household. You see these significant price increase. So all around, it's becoming more and more expensive. It's not just here, but other, I'm sure back in the mainland and other areas, we're seeing the same trend. And do you see that continuing for an extended period of time, or do you see that at some point, do you foresee, and again, there's so many other factors happening out in the world right now, it's not, that easy to come to a determination, but how do you see this going? Because at some point, our consumers are just not going to be able to continue. If this continues over months, it's going to really, just basic living is going to be beyond the reach of so many of our people.
I think it's virtually assured that prices will continue to go up over the next few months. And the reason for that is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has another index besides the consumer price index, what the consumers pay. It's called the producer price index, what the producers are paying to get the materials to manufacture their products. So those have followed a similar increase. The last time I looked, it was about 8% on an annual basis. So when they finish producing their products and sell them to the retailers, those higher costs will have to be passed on at the retail level. I am hopeful, and it's reasonable that the rate of the inflation could decline, especially with aggressive monetary and fiscal policies with the federal government. Although it's almost certain that there'll be additional price increases and inflation.
With the increase of interest rates that have just happened, do you foresee, again, I think, I'm assuming human nature, if you only have a limited amount in your budget, you're going to be very mindful how you spend it, or in some cases not spend. Even people that may have, additional monies available, be a natural tendency to hold on to that and not spend in the economy. So for our local community, how do you see with the government in terms of our ability to generate? I mean, we're starting to see tourists trickle back, but in terms of travel and primarily what we rely on for our own revenue generating here on Guam, yes, we see the increase of the military buildup. We anticipated that several years ago to go for about a 10-year period. We're 4 years into that 10-year period. But with our tourism industry, how do you see that rebounding even to anywhere where we were in January of 2019? How do you see that? Because I'm a little concerned about the bridge between the time this federal money starts to dissipate and the time that our economy even gets anywhere up to a level that's even going to support this government that has continued to grow over the last few years. I don't know if our people can afford the government at this end that now exists with all the pay increases and hiring that's been going on, including on ARP funds that I don't know how will be sustained when the money does dry up. What are your thoughts on that so far?
The good news is that very recently the biggest constraints to travel are the quarantine requirements and the company or the country's restrictions. Those have been lifted recently for entry into the United States. You no longer need a quarantine or a vaccination, or excuse me, you no longer need a COVID shot coming in. And similarly in Korea, so I've looked on the airport monitor on my cable TV, and some days we see as many as 4 Korean airlines coming in. So that has really accelerated quickly, and I expect that to pick up quite a bit. I'm optimistic that a similar situation will occur with Japan soon. Japan has opened up for tourism of groups, and their citizens are allowed to travel to the United States and return without quarantine. So that's the biggest issue. along with getting the flights reinstated so that they can travel in larger numbers. So I'm very confident that it will increase very substantially in the short term, but it will be potentially years before we get back to where it was in 2020. Fortunately, also, along with that expansion, we have additional federal funds with the infrastructure bill, and the Marine Corps relocation projects are accelerating and moving into a phase from design and land clearing to more labor intensive. So we've seen the number of H-2 workers and employment go up, and contracts, the large amounts of contracts being issued. So I think over the U.S. is looking at possibly a recession and being more likely within a year or two. I think until the base is completed, that we have little likelihood of a recession on Guam.
Do you think, though, that because of the increased costs for construction, because that still has yet to be addressed with regards to local economy and people in the community, to be able to build, afford homes, or even do extensions? I myself am holding off on one because the cost now is, my extension is going to cost more than my house that I originally built. How do you see that for our local community, though, in terms of our quality of life? I mean, the bases are being built, but, you know, they have the money to do it. But the average person that's earning, going to work, and even, you know, 2 family incomes coming in, on top of increased prices of just basic commodities. How long do you see that in place?
I think the rate of acceleration, which is on an annual basis been double digits for housing costs, are more related to demand than the price, because the labor costs in terms of the wages have only been going up for construction several % a year. Mm-hmm. So it's not the labor costs that are driving it so much as the shortage of labor and the demand. I expect that situation will change significantly when the base is completed.
So it might be another 4 to 5 years.
It could be, but also with the higher interest rates, that also puts a damper on the amount people can pay for houses. So I think the rapid increase in housing sales prices will be substantially mitigated. But there's another issue that if we don't have census data to have or data on people leaving Guam, but there's a number of anecdotal stories from the DOE that fewer students in some schools, and others that we know people that have left the island, that with as hotels do not recover quickly and people unemployed for a year or two are forced to make big decisions and move off island, that may create vacancies. So how that balances out will remain to be seen.
Yeah, just one last question. You brought about employment. I mean, we're also hearing from the business industry. They just had a forum last week, tourism group, with regards to challenges they're having in just hiring people. You do see the employment ads for hiring, that they're just simply not able to hire people back into these positions. What do you think is the cause of that? Is it because people are leaving, or what do you think is impacting that all of a sudden? I mean, there's always a need for employment, but to the degree that's available now, that these same businesses that were in operation before are not able to get individuals to come and work for them. What do you think has impacted that? Do you think it's the exodus of people, or people that just don't want to work at this point after coming through this pandemic, or those that also were able to receive higher, federal law, funding to offset unemployment? What do you think?
This issue has come up in the last year or two. That's the first I've really heard of it, is the combination of very high unemployment and high labor shortage where employers can't get people occurring simultaneously. Usually it's one or the other. I think part of it is, a large part of it is just, it takes time for things to adjust. So the employers will be able to attract people, but people don't just change their career and their life and a job overnight. So it takes, you know, those businesses were built up over a period of years and people are attracted. And so when they're shut down for a year or two, getting into people, the right people with the right skills and the right occupations who have moved on to something else to get that rebuilt isn't going to happen overnight. Those people aren't just sitting there waiting. Fortunately, some of them were just sitting there waiting because the pandemic assistance funds and combined with the business support allowed people to just hang in there. And a lot of the companies that reduced hours rather than laid off people, they're able to increase the hours. So there is a substantial ability, but just like the Great Recession at the end of the Bush administration, some people that were eligible to retire, some older workers, after they lost their employment during the pandemic, they just decided to retire and stay retired. So yeah, it's a combination of some retirees, some people have reevaluated their life, some people have left island, a whole host of issues. And I think a lot of it too is just the time it takes to readjust. And that as businesses advertise and recruit more aggressively, they'll find people will gradually come on board.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate your insight and responding to my questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Hiles, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to maybe get some input from anybody in the panel. So gas prices on base, I think according to my information here, is about $4.60 a gallon, and here outside of the base, it's up to $6.49. Can you explain why the difference? Anybody on the panel? Is there a huge subsidy?
I can't explain that, but point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
All fuels sold to the U.S. entities are exempt from our local taxes, exempt, and so is fuel sold to the government of Guam.
Senator Perez.
Okay, so I guess, thank you for that information. So what we do here as far as taxes can hopefully have an effect to reduce the cost of gas for our everyday consumer. I mean, that's okay, maybe if anybody can provide that information. The other thing too is, yeah, I'm reading here an article. It says the International Energy Agency urged governments around the world to consider drastic steps to slashing oil demand. And I think there are practical reasons for that, regardless of what the cost of gas is. But perhaps this question for Mr. Hiles, with the reduced use of gas and the reduced cost of gas, can you maybe provide a economic impact, I guess, for Guam? If Guam were to go in that direction, reducing the cost of gasoline to the average consumer as well as reducing the oil usage or consumption.
If consumers reduce their consumption of fuel, and I expect that they will somewhat with dramatically higher prices, but that will probably occur over a longer time as they can switch to other options such as taking the mass transit, carpooling, buying a more fuel efficient vehicle, maintaining their car, moving closer to work, remote there's a variety of things people could do, and that will have an effect over a period of time, but usually not that quickly. I don't think it'll affect the world price because Guam is so small. The overall economy, if you look at the dollar amount of sales, is probably not affected by the price of gas because people are spending more on gas, and that leaves less money to spend on other things. So there's the same dollar amount of economic activity, but they're less well off because they're unable to buy as much of other things.
What if they were just to, like, say, reduce the cost? What effect would that have on the economy?
Oh, well, if the price of fuel coming into Guam was down, that would allow people to spend more money on other things. And that they'd have greater welfare, but it wouldn't change the dollar amount of sales or business activity.
Would it affect the cost of goods?
The price of fuel has a significant impact on the cost of goods because many goods are, especially plastics, are made out of petroleum products. The transportation to get it here, the manufacturing, all use fuel. The trucks to deliver it, the ships, airplanes. So if the worldwide price of fuel goes down, that or goes up as it has been doing, that is a component in the prices of everything else going up, especially food.
What about locally? So if we reduce the cost of gas locally, what impact would that have on the cost of goods?
If it would, if you reduce the cost of fuel on like diesel that is used for businesses shipping the goods around, that might have that's probably a small component of their total cost, but it would probably mitigate cost increases somewhat.
Okay, I appreciate your responses. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Tadegui.
Selective, you're being selective. Hey, don't time me now on that one.
We're mixing up the movement.
Be nice to get head notice so that we can prepare, but regardless. Thank you, Mr. Hiles, for being here. Again, the panel, for all your participation during these questions that we're having. Mr. Byrne, going back to the FY22 budget, there's an amendment in the budget that requires that any excess revenue generated for FY21, even 2020, well, FY21, 22, must have an appropriation made by the legislature. I think what you're referring to by going ahead and paying any kind of deficit is based on another law that's in the books. But in the budget bill, we clearly spell out that particular law that you're talking about. And saying not, we didn't put a notwithstanding. We incorporate that particular law saying that, no, this does not apply. You must get an appropriation by the legislature in order to spend any excess revenue for FY21 as well as 22. Do you concur?
Do I concur with the words or with what you just said?
Well, with the amendment and the Attorney General's opinion.
Yes, we've discussed the Attorney General's opinion previously, Senator.
Okay.
And the conclusion was that the governor was able to, in particular, pay down a deficit, but not be tied to any particular appropriation for the, for excess revenues. Of course, if this body chooses to do something with it, and in previous bills that have been through this particular hall, they have done so, then that's absolutely their entitlement, and the administration follows that.
Well, I think the Attorney General is clear on their opinion, and I don't think it's correct. So any kind of money or any time you're going to use any excess revenue, you need legislative appropriation. So that may mean if there is a shortfall in the highway fund, then you're going to have to use your governor's transfer authority, but you won't be able to use any excess revenue. And we can go, I'm not going to argue this on the
Senator,
point,
but you
but
can't, the governor's transfer authority doesn't
pay
cross.
down deficits or anything?
No,
Well,
no, it doesn't.
well, then I don't know how it's
cross into
gonna-
special funds.
Okay, which means I don't know how you're going to pay down if there is a shortfall in the highway fund. So we'll continue to call. Since I have you there, right now there's currently on the May 31st, 2022 ARP funding balance. They're showing still the governor has $28,970,554 in ARP funding balance. That's what the report is showing. And it's showing that the program Salapi was set aside $11 million for the program Salapi. And currently right now in the program Salapi, there's still a balance funding of $8,312,724. Is that correct?
As of the date you mentioned, yes.
Okay. Do you have an updated number?
No, I don't.
Okay. Mr. Ariola, you have the Village Street Master Plan that you've been working on. We're seeing some progress to it and fixing the roads, the secondary roads, because everybody knows that the main routed roads receive federal funding. And not only through federal funding, but the infrastructure bill that was recently passed, or not recently passed, but was passed by Congress to provide additional funding for the next 5 years for these routed roads. The routed roads. But the Village Street Master Plan, how much funding do you have for that master plan, and how much is the cost of what you've already identified for the master plan for the village streets?
Thank you, Senator. Over the last, I'd say the last year, we've spent close to $6 million in village streets. We've used some funding from the original appropriation from this legislature, from this body, and some funding from we've used ARP funding for some of the village streets.
What is the cost of the master plan?
The master plan, there was actually a plan put together several years ago that at one point pegged, had a number of, I believe, it was like about 700 million to do almost a little over 600 miles of roads on Guam. If everything were to happen in one shot, I think the price tag back then was like about 700 million, if I remember correctly.
And do you think that number has grown because of inflation and?
Oh, absolutely. Price of materials, price of labor.
Okay. From OFB, you mentioned earlier, and I went ahead and pulled out a sheet from the taxes that are provided to all states. And because you said earlier that Guam pays the lowest in the nation of liquid fuel tax. And you're absolutely right. I pulled it up. Guam is the lowest, extremely low than any other state or territory on paying of liquid fuel tax. So I appreciate you bringing that to our attention with regards to that. And the other thing, the reason why I brought up the program Salapi too, I too believe that the governor has enough funding not only to provide a second round of the program Salapi through Executive Order 22-03, but to expand it to include additional people that can not just qualify, but give them that little lenience. It's not just one person at a household, but those who all have a vehicle that we can include? I mean, it's obvious we are hurting inflation. Gary, you talked about inflation, the high inflation speed of it, but then going into a recession could be a possibility next. But would you say that if this bill were to pass for these gas companies, do you really think that this would make such a huge impact to our community? Have you had an opportunity, Gary, to read the legislation and see how much money is really going to be saving at the gas pump for our community? In other words, if they gas up 1 gallon of gas that costs them $6.48 today, that the savings are going to save is what, 23 cents?
Depending on the bill, 295-36.
Don't worry, Mr. Moylan, we know it's my time.
Yeah, is 15 cents plus 4 cents per gallon on the automotive surcharge, so that's 19 cents. So that, compared to the price of gas, would be a little bit helpful. It basically reverse this week's increase. So it's not going to have a substantial effect on the economy at all, but it will be an improvement for people at the gas pump a little bit.
A little bit, compared to the program Salapi at $300 per household. Okay, Mr. Chair, I know my time is up, and I wish I had a little more time with Mr. Hiles with regards to do the comparison between the $300 given to the family versus, what they're going to get here. So thank you, Mr. Hiles, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the extended. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tyree. Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go ahead and continue on with it. I guess the conversation that was started by my colleague here. Mr. Byrne, how much did the governor put aside for the program in Salapi? And how much did she put aside?
I'm trying to remember the exact amount, but I think it was like 13 million.
13 million. Okay. And I'm reading her letter that she sent to me this past Monday. She says that, in the letter it says that of the 13 million, which you say that she put aside, they've only issued $3,746,100 for program in Salapi. My DI math says that's a little bit over $9 million that's left in that account. Right? I mean, if you take
Yes, and
13...
let me, if I may, I can give you some history on this.
Sure.
When we originally were looking at what we expected, and please bear in mind, Senator, this was a new program for which people had to apply, so we had to estimate what the likely uptake would be. We actually thought that we were going to have around about 50 to 60,000 applications. In the event, in the first round, before we extended it, we had about 24,000. And that's the principal reason why the expenditure is much lower than the budget. You can look at this several ways, right? You could conclude that the economic situation, at least at the time when this was started, for applicants was not as serious or as deep as some people thought. My own view is that from what I can see from the applicants that we've actually been able to process, and please bear in mind that this was an application based on household size, and that we set the limits at 3 times the federal poverty level. that those applicants who were successful in submitting their application probably have a deeper problem, but the population that they come from is not as big as we thought. So you've got a group of people who have a depth of an economic problem rather than as widespread as we thought. But we continue to, as we finalize this round, we continue to analyze the applications that we have.
Oh, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate the program. So, you mentioned that I guess the eligibility was based on, correct me, you said 3 times the poverty level?
We used a table that was set forth in the Treasury Final Rule. And as it was giving some information about how under the original, the so-called interim final rule, federal poverty levels were determined to cut off at a much lower level under that rule. But under this new rule, because Treasury had determined that the economic effect, the economic disadvantage was affecting not just low wage earners, but middle income wage earners, they were suggesting that we use the 300% of the federal poverty level. So we took that table, and that's the table that we based our eligibility format on.
And what is that 300% poverty level? What is that income level that let's talk?
Well, it depends how many people are in the household, because...
Okay, let's talk about a household of...
But for a household of 4...
4, yes.
Which is the one I have in my head, so it's about 95,000.
So 95,000. Okay. Is there any restrictions to going above to 500% of the poverty level?
I don't know there's any restriction. I think at such a large amount, we would probably have to get consent from the Treasury.
I'm just trying to find a way to be able to get, to use the $9 million you have left over in that program. And to help you.
Thank you.
Okay?
I think we have a number of suggestions.
9 million.
Yeah, it's actually like 8 million, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. But
yes.
It's a lot more than what this is going to provide to us in the next year, right?
Yes.
Because
this is 10 million, right?
But see, Mr. Byrne, what I'm getting at is if we can find a way to help you use that $9 million there, okay? Then there's no need to have this conversation right now.
Thank you. I will take your comments and speak to the governor about it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator San Agustin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of my colleagues brought up about that program Salapi that's going out there, the $300. But we're here and we're talking about fuel. I'm not talking about any other program. Those other programs are good programs. Maybe the title should be changed, because as we all talk about, because it's been mentioned many times, the program Salapi, maybe we should not change it to program Gasolina. But one of the things we all have to understand is when we start talking about changing of the way we're going to provide funding, or if the governor can provide the funding, we need to be minded that it's not about giving everybody fuel, because when we talk about gas, if you are a registered owner of a vehicle, that's the one that needs the gas, because that's what is going to be given gas, is the vehicle. And if I'm correct, there's less number of people that own cars than there's number of people that need help, when you look at it overall. And it comes down to the same thing when we talk about the 14 cents or 15 cents or 19 cents, whatever that number is. This bill is no different than the other bill I authored. We're talking about the wholesalers being given a repeal of the liquid fuel tax or moratorium. That's all I was pursuing. And that's what I'm in support of. Because why? This bill doesn't identify the impact to the agencies right now. That's what I'm worried about. What is the impact? It needs to be clear. That's one. Number two, you need to identify a source of funding and who's going to pay for it. And then on the repeal of liquid fuel tax, for me, it's long-term. The moratorium is a short-term. It can be extended without any reservation. It's the body that decides that. But a repeal is gone. Once it's gone, then exactly what was mentioned earlier, then this body, when we work on the budget, we need to find a source of funding. And I think it was mentioned earlier, we don't have a crystal ball. So we got to deal with whatever we can project. And the executive branch will come before the legislative body, the OFB and BBMR and DOA will sit down and come up with what the numbers could be. And that's what I'm concerned about. Once you repeal, it's gone. Liquid fuel taxes equates to about $10 million a year, period. That's what we're looking at based on what it costs today. But little do we realize that where's the true impact at? The impact is really at the vendor. It's not at the wholesaler. Wholesaler's going to give you the price. 15, 19 cents, 23 cents across the market. When it leaves the wholesaler, whatever the vendor charges, that's where the GRT's at. But today we're talking about liquid fuel tax. And I just say, number one, I'm not in support of repealing any liquid fuel tax. I would support a moratorium because why? We can measure it. No different like when we did trying to think of that, when we did one bill where we had to extend it 1 year, and that was I'll probably think of it later, but that's okay because there'll be a third round where I'll be able to comment about it. But unless Mr. Hiles, if you can comment about your opinion about the economic impact of this bill, 261, because we're going to hear the other bills, and then you can comment then. But if you can give us, because what I've been hearing is it's global market impact beyond our control. What's the economic impact when we repeal the liquid fuel tax, sir?
Since one of the major purposes of the liquid fuel tax is to support improvement in the non-federally funded roads, especially on a longer term basis, if we don't repair the roads, you will have other costs such as ruining your shocks and your suspension periodically. So there's some serious costs that can be hundreds of dollars or more, or potential accidents that will occur on an irregular basis. So there's costs of not appropriately maintaining the roads, and that's a trade-off between, yes, you may get a lower tax at the pump, but you may not notice a few cents at the pump, but you're going to notice expensive auto repair. So for a short term, that may not affect a substantial amount of maintenance on the road, but if it's on a permanent basis and that comes out of the road repair, that would result in potentially increased deterioration of the roads, which are already, in many cases, need more repair rather than less.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. That will end round 2. We will take a short recess to dismiss the members of the panel before we go into round 3. Again, round 3 is for any amendments or final comments on the bill. Okay, the Committee of the Whole is reconvened. We are now on round 3. Again, each senator has 5 minutes. This round is for amendments and comments on the bill. We begin with Senator San Agustin. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number one, I don't have any amendments. Number two, my comments are such as, number one, I think when I last spoke, I mentioned that I forgot something I wanted to mention. Number one, this bill is talking about a repeal. No matter how you look at it, it's a repeal of liquid fuel tax. That's on the wholesaler. The next bill that we'll be hearing later would be about a moratorium. The moratorium is similar to when my colleagues remember when we did the minimum wage increase. We wanted to measure what the economic impact would be. It was supposed to happen a year later. A good colleague of ours from Tumon asked to delay it 1 year. We delayed it 1 year. Then it went into effect. The repeal, it was mentioned by the economists, has a long-term effect. And it was also mentioned by my colleagues that if we had a crystal ball and we knew where we were going, then we know what we need to deal with. We know what the impact would be with the repeal or the impact of the moratorium, either one. The repeal, it's one shot. One shot, one kill. You don't put expirations on repeals. Either it's gone or it's not gone. That's just how it works. And I would just make a comment that number one, I don't support a repeal. I would support on the bills that would be coming up, a moratorium, and that we move from there, we measure it in 6 months, or whatever number of months that my colleagues would choose, they would prefer it to last. The bill has a 6 month on the next bills that would be heard. And with that, I have nothing else further to say, but other than that, I don't support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. Senator Blas. Senator Tadegui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you for my colleagues indulging me trying to get my amendments up. I apologize for the delay. But I'm going to go for the first amendment, which is on line 15, page 3. And what it simply does, as I was reading the Bill 261 substitute on the floor, there was a section on page 3 that had the effective date January 1st, 2018. I did seek some advice through legal, just to ensure and clarify that this is not retroactive. When crossing out letters A and B, that it's definitely has no bearing on being retroactive. Last thing we need to do is have these gas companies come back to us and ask for their funding back, or not their funding, their taxes back for paying for that Section A and B. So it just simply crosses out effective January 1st, 2018. That's all the amendment does. Just to clean it up.
Is that it, Senator Tadegui?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
That's it.
thank you, Senator Tadegui. So there is an amendment to line 15, page 3, to amend the bill to read fuel tax, and it's striking out effective January 1st, 2018. Is that correct? Is that the correct amendment?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. It's to avoid any confusion of anything that was retroactive. And once again, I sought legal advice on this too as well.
Okay, and this is SB 261 TTT L15 P3 COTW. On the amendment, any objections or any comments on the amendment? Seeing no objections, you may close on the amendment.
No need.
Seeing no objections, motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm going to withdraw one of my amendments that I placed, and that was on line 11, page 6. I'm withdrawing that amendment. It was on line 11, page 6, so I'm withdrawing.
Okay, thank you, Senator Titlegy. Technically, you have not proffered the amendment.
Oh, okay, good.
So at this time, the clerk was just clarifying with me that it hasn't technically been proffered, so no need to withdraw it at this time.
Okay, so just to my colleagues, giving them that information.
Thank you.
Then my last amendment, Mr. Chair, is SB 261 TTTT L8 P6, a new 4 COTW. And Mr. Chair, this is on line 8, page 6. What this does, Mr. Chair, and I'll read it for you for the amendment, is a new section 4 is added, and all subsequent sections are enumerated to read. Section 4, use of program Salapi, Aduda y Tautau, notwithstanding any other provisions of law or rule or regulation, Maga'hågan Guåhan has the option to open a second round of program Salapi, Aduda y Tautau implemented through Executive Order 202203, using ARP funding to augment the purpose of this act. Mr. Chair, if you recall, when I believe you were in you were in the 35th Guam Legislature when we passed a bill called the RISE Act. And what happened was, after the bill was passed, the governor went ahead and created her own All Rise Act. It was called the RISE Act, and then she implemented her called the All Rise Act, through an executive order, basically doing the same thing. And she used funding that came from federal funds. So, Mr. Chair, this gives the governor the option to do that as well. I mean, we spoke, Gary Hiles, he didn't really have an opportunity to look at the difference between giving $300 voucher to an individual versus how much money are you going to save if we were to pass this bill, the liquid fuel tax, repeal it by receiving 23 cents per gallon. Some people said it's actually 15. According to DPW, it's only going to be 15 cents per gallon. But whatever those cents are, it's not going to be as effective unless we go back to the program Salapi that provided these $300 gas vouchers. And if you do the math on this and divide it, you're going to look at that kind of savings to last for 35 months. If you do the math, 35 months if it was a $300 voucher versus this. So that's what the bill does. It just simply gives the governor the option to utilize this funding toward what's desperately needed in our community right now. And I'd like to thank my co-sponsor of this legislation, this amendment, Mr. Senator Frank Bloss Jr., for co-sponsoring and doing his due diligence in pushing for this funding to be utilized for the gas vouchers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. On this amendment, SB 261 TTT L8 P6, new 4 COTW, to line 8, page 6. Anyone on the amendment? Senator San Agustin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, and to the author of this and the co-sponsor of this amendment, I have no objection to a letter being written to the governor asking for a second round. But I'm just trying to understand how this applies to Bill 261, which deals with the repeal of the liquid fuel tax. That's all, and that's no objection to a letter given to the governor to ask for a second round. That I agree with. Please do ask the governor in a letter format. But I'm just trying to understand how this applies to the liquid fuel tax repeal, Bill 261. That's my confusion, and I don't know, maybe legal can comment. I don't know how this is germane, even though it was discussed. But a letter to the notwithstanding any other provisions of law, and Maga'hågan has the option, yes, open a second round, yes. I say, write a letter. I support the request to ask the governor to do a second round. And maybe not be program Salapi, I mentioned it earlier, maybe program Gasolina. And I don't say that jokingly, I say that honestly, that maybe that could work. It's not just to give money just so you can use for whatever you want, but it's in the effort of reducing the cost of our constituents on gasoline. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Speaker?
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to talk about this amendment, but maybe more importantly is I agree with the retiring speaker and his seriousness on what was just mentioned. I maybe would ask if I can have a question posed for legal. Can we legislate that the governor may introduce an executive order? Because for me, I think, isn't this an executive branch thing, and are we crossing the separation of powers doctrine? And I have another question for Senator Moylan, so maybe we can take a moment's recess just to ask
Yes.
that question, because it may be pertinent to this. Okay,
I will take a moment's recess and ask these questions of legal counsel.
thank you.
Oh, so, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we are back from recess. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity for you to check with legal counsel. And the reason why I bring this up is I think it's important that as we look at this amendment before us, and me really asking about the germaneness, I mean, I probably would have a question for the good senator from Tumon on this amendment, and it's a real simple one, Mr. Chair. Did he need a law to tell him that he can write a letter to the governor, or could you just write a letter to the governor? And I know, really, I'm serious. So I think it's important that that I think that this is not germane, and I don't know. Yes, I yield to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Actually, during the recess, I did confer with legal, and at this time, I will have to make the ruling that this particular amendment is not germane to the bill. So that's my ruling on this particular amendment.
I object. I object.
I think there needs to be a motion to over.
Correct, yes.
But I will know for the record that I will support a letter too, like the previous speaker. Thank you.
What?
I would support a letter from, if she wrote one, so I'm saying.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
We've already started that letter, if a letter is needed. If my amendment doesn't pass, we have a letter already sent out to the governor standing by for signatures of this body to sign on to. So if that's the case, then I welcome my colleagues and still object to, I'm going to object to your call for being that it's not germane. So
Point of
we'll
order.
move her there.
Senator Nelson.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. You already made a ruling that it was not germane. You gavelled down. The objection came after. They are free to challenge the ruling of the chair.
Correct, you're correct. You can't object to the ruling. You can challenge the ruling.
Right.
That's in a separate motion. Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
I just want to speak on the amendment prior to the vote, if that's okay.
No.
The amendment has been ruled not germane.
But there's a challenge to it, and they're going to vote on the challenge. If I can.
No motion was made.
Yeah, an objection, Mr. Chair. Whether I say objection or challenge, either or, I've pointed out that I do not agree with your calling.
Yes, that's correct, Senator Tidy. Please make the correct motion.
I challenge your ruling on the germaneness of the amendment. Is that better, Mr. Chair?
Thank you.
Thank
Senator
you for
Tidy.
allowing me to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. That is not a motion. That is a challenge.
Okay.
You need to make.
I will take that as a motion. There is a motion to challenge the ruling of the chair. All those in favor of the motion.
On the motion, can I speak?
Senator Speaker Talahi, you're recognized on the motion.
Thank you. So the ruling is that the amendment is not germane, and the amendment requires or tells the governor that she has the option to open a second round of Programan sa Lapid at Duda ni Tautau through executive order using ARP funds. Do we support a second round of Programan sa Lapid at Duda ni Tautau? I surely do, and I think there's nothing to prevent the governor from doing that. The difference between that program and what we're trying to do in this bill is that that program affects only those who qualify, whereas this bill would affect every gas consumer. And the governor has already told us in her letter that she does not support a permanent repeal of the taxes. And so the question is really whether the government of Guam, with its $80 million, $87 million excess for FY22, can spare the $2.8 million for the remaining months of the fiscal year 2022 and give that money in relief to consumers of gas, the people of Guam, every family. if it can spare $8 million, only $8 million of the 72 million or 80 million in excess of, in additional revenue that they are projecting for FY23. Or whether we can't spare that money and we can't give this relief, and these taxpayers have to continue to contribute to the government of Guam while we sit on 80 million or 87 million dollars in excess. That's really the question. And I don't want to put a poison pill in the bill by saying anything about ARP funds, because that's exactly what we've been cautioned about. We all know that they are sitting on ARP funds and that they can do these programs when they want. Si Dios máximos.
Okay, there's been a challenge of the ruling of the chair. I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor of challenging the ruling of the chair signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Senator Tidy, will you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Still have the floor. Thank you, appreciate it. You know, Mr. Chair, as we discussed the prior amendment and the comments that were made by the prior speaker, and it's true, this program Salapi, which is Executive Order 2203, which Mr. Byrne had said there was $13 million that was put aside in this account, when actually, if you look at the reports that we received, it's $11,700,000, and only $3.3 million has been spent to date. That's leaving $8.3 million left over for this funding. You know, I greatly appreciate, you know, the intent of this bill. And what we're trying to do as a body to assist our community, a community that's been hit hard for the last 2 years, and many still out of a job, and now having to deal with the rising cost of food and now gas. You know, I'm going to write a letter, right? It's already been actually written, ready to go for the governor, to the governor. And hopefully my colleagues, like I said earlier, will sign on that letter to ask the governor to use the program Salapi funding, because I think that's going to go a whole lot further than by repealing the liquid fuel tax, a fund that's used to take care of our secondary roads. Many people have come to my office, Mr. Chair, and advocated that their roads are so bad that how many tires they've gone through, their axle to their wheel alignment is broken because of these roads, and most especially, Mr. Chair, the accidents that occur when people try to avoid potholes. That's a major safety issue. We're still going to get those calls until we finally address it. And it was said by DPW, they need $700 million for repairs of these roads that they have in their master plan. Mr. Chair, I thank you again for indulging me and the opportunity to provide my amendments. And even though you ruled on the germaneness of this, I'll find another alternative. But I appreciate it and thank you for the opportunity, and I hope that we can really do something substantial for our community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any amendments at this time, but I'd just like to make a comment regarding this bill. I think, you know, we've heard in the Committee of the Whole how the degree with which we can control the cost of gasoline is, it's very difficult to control these international costs, considering that we don't produce oil. But yet, this is one measure which we do have control, and it does have an effect on our everyday citizens, both residents as well as businesses. And so I think any kind of relief that we can provide to our community is really important at this time. But in any event, I do wish that we can come together with a more coordinated approach on how to address the cost of oil on our island, in light of also perhaps transitioning to more fossil fuel independence. I know that probably has an effect also on the cost of oil because it has affected the supply. But I think it's important that perhaps maybe we should get a roundtable to really discuss and develop more coordinated policies. So this is Masi.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Vice Speaker.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair, no amendments, but I just want to note, as I said earlier, I'm glad that we are finally here to discuss this measures. I think it's clear that we all have the same goal, and we have a crisis right now, and we must address that right now, but we can't do something that, and I want to say that we can't do something that jeopardizes Guam's future. In regards to this liquid fuels tax, I want to note as part of this liquid fuels tax is that even the previous administration has said there isn't a magic wand that the accountants can wave to make money appear beyond taxes and fees that are currently collected and obligated to the existing functions of the government. If the economy doesn't level off in the next few months, we can always come back. But Mr. Chair, we need to ensure that we have a dedicated funding source to keep our roads. And I must stress that we need to ensure that we have a dedicated funding source to keep our records. And I just want to note that for once, I want to say that the good senator from Tumon, I'll bring him up again, and this administration are finally seeing eye to eye, and I'm glad that we are here that they literally were able to be the impetus of us bringing us all together to act on these important measures before us today. So, I just want to bring that to the forefront and say thank you for giving me the opportunity. Sanamasi.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to comment. I think it's important to recognize while we're here, looking at the legislation to reduce and remove the taxes on the gas as to why we're here. We're here because our people are continuing to feel the continued increase of cost of living as a result of this pandemic. Now that we're finally, hopefully, we're seeing cases come up again, but hopefully we can try to get back to some sense of normalcy. And the reward for that, unfortunately, with the impact that this has had on the global market, is it's getting more and more expensive by the day. And I think we need to call the obvious of what has happened. Our governor, on behalf of our people, was given a substantial amount of federal money to help our island come out of this pandemic and hopefully help our people get to some sense of normalcy back in their lives. The reward for them now is that it's costing more and more for them simply to exist on a daily basis, of having to make even tougher decisions on the most basic of needs that they have for their family. And all this while the administration hoards over $300 million of public money that it has been so reluctant and so incredibly resistant to providing public accountability, not just to this legislature, but more importantly to our community, on how those funds are spent. That's really the bottom line of what's happening here in our community. Granted, I'm sure the governor has her own agenda of how she thinks this money should be used, because she thinks only she gets to decide that. Well, I guess the people of Guam will in another month and a half get to decide that also, if they think that this is the right direction and the right leadership that they should have at a time when these needs are very real. We're not going to get to 5, 10, 15 years from now if we can't get through the next year or two. And that was the intent of these funds, and I think that's where there's a correlation of these issues. That was the intent of this money in the very first place. There's a time and place, certainly, I'm sure we could look at how to construct a new hospital that the people of Guam can afford and the people of Guam need. But right now, when these needs are very real and very pressing to our people, we're not seeing that. We're seeing comments that, oh, this money has, yes, it's still there, but it's already been dedicated. The funds have already been dedicated. Of course, dedicated to her own agenda that really doesn't take into consideration the real needs of our people that our people are seeing and feeling every day. And while they feel, oh, we've already given out money, we've given out programs, you know, the letter that Senator Blas had sent to the governor last week. Oh, we've even given more than the CNMI, was her response. Well, I guess if the needs ended there, we'd be fine. But the needs continue to grow as our people are continuously impacted by the unfortunate realities of what's happening external to our island. All we can make decisions on, Mr. Chair, is what we can do within our authorities and within our jurisdictions. And certainly you have to admit the governor has not been forthcoming. She's decided onto herself. I mean, for my colleagues, those of you that attended that meeting over a year ago, what happened with all of that? What happened to all of your collective inputs with regards to how you believe the money should be best spent among our people? Well, probably just as silent as that. Nothing, nowhere was the input of the legislature really included. And the governor continues to assert her authorities, and we continue to see all these commercials that are paid for with federal money so they can advertise all the great things they're doing for Guam with the people's money that benefits themselves, because they can't simply put their face and name and connection to all these federal gifts that they make it and want to make appear that they themselves are giving, rather than doing their own campaign ads on their own campaign dime. And yet there's a reluctance, a continued reluctance to address the needs that are here and now and are very real for our people out there that are struggling to get by. So yes, I see relevance. I mean, certainly, Mr. Chair, you've already ruled on this issue, but there's a very direct correlation with regards to how our people are being directly impacted by these increased costs, and yet the opportunity and the federal resources that have been provided to Guam to assist them is being denied. So I have to thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to provide that comment with regards to this issue.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Moylan, you're recognized.
No, I have no comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Senator Duenas.
This is Mossy, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I support this bill. I support the proposal, and I can recognize some of the comments from my colleagues. The need to fund a master plan, the need to address the issue of a dedicated funding source. I think the problem is right now, Mr. Chairman, is the need is here and now. And this is just one small step in so many things we have to do going forward in order to be able to help our people. You know, one of the reasons why I wanted to use this as an opportunity to discuss going forward my disappointment with how we've been dealing with these issues is, simply put, at least in two pay raises that have been issued in the last 6 to 8 months that we're going to be dealing with going into the fiscal year is not been done through this legislature, not been done through the budgeting process, not taken into consideration the totality of what we have to do. And so here we are again now. We have this one opportunity, and yes, it is a repeal. You know, the one thing I think that our people have always been able to accept is if you can put a proposal before them and show how the impacts of that proposal are going to have tangible and realizable results. And I'm not knocking anybody who's got the tough job of going out there and working on our secondary and tertiary roads. There's been a lot of good work done. I mean, a lot of that stuff started with the give us your top 3 during the Camacho administration. Many roads were done in the villages using various funding sources. And they've continued throughout. Not picking anyone here, I'm just saying I know that's where a lot of this started. And that's what it comes down to, Mr. Chairman. To me, when you're gonna show up and say, we need a funding source, a dedicated funding source for something, show that master plan. Show the implementation of that master plan. Perhaps in better days, in a couple of years, as the economist said, there is a lot of optimism. There probably will be a change, a sea change eventually, in terms of how liquid fuels tax and other things are even being addressed. In terms of where we derive our energy from, years and maybe a decade to come. But in the meantime, the reality is here and now. And I think the repeal is appropriate because we can come back to the table. We can come back to the table in the future, showing that the master plan is there, it's ready to go. But in the meantime, like the author of this bill said, and I continue to say as well, many of our colleagues continue to say, we continue to tout these additional resources and the $80+ million that's continuously being discussed. Yet, we have difficulty sitting down at the table together deciding it, particularly in this House, where appropriations happen, in terms of how the priorities are going to be identified. So I think it's just important to demonstrate that not to go with a 6-month, although I'll probably vote for both bills because I think one's going to get vetoed, but not to sit down and put ourselves in a position where we are saying, well, here's 6 months, or here's another 6 months, then we'll come back in 18 months, or whatever else it is, I mean, that's up to the body. People will vote the way they're going to vote. But I say repeal it outright for now and come back to the table. And this, like I said, is just the first step in many things we have to do to help our people. But at least it sets a situation whereby this tax is no longer levied. And as hopefully at some point it stabilizes, and as things come down and we get back, to where we're not just concentrating on surviving and actually get back to the table to plan going forward. I think if, in the eventuality where prices come down, I know it's never going to be popular to implement a tax. Taxes are never something that the people want to deal with. But in a time where you can put something before them where they can understand, like I said, that there's a tangible result coming out from it, there's a real plan, there's an implementation, that they'll see those changes, not incrementally, but on a real scheduled basis going forward, and they know that that sacrifice goes to that. I think there would be a solid understanding, but the here and now, I believe, calls for immediate actions on things and to get rid of them to the extent that we can do the most amount of good, come back to the drawing board when that time comes. That's just my feelings on this bill. I will be voting for it, and I think that there's another amendment coming forth to show the true thing that we should be doing, and that is appropriating. Identifying the resources, accounting for the resources, showing the people where their money is going, their tax dollars, and then coming back to the table at another time, Mr. Chairman. So I support this proposal, and I'm glad that the author introduced it. Jesus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Torres. Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you to my colleagues. We are here because the gas prices continue to increase. When we thought they were stalling, the day we called emergency session, the gas prices had just jumped again another 15 cents. It's so this is again a worldwide problem, but it's contributing to the unemployment, the exacerbating the existing unemployment, the existing food and housing insecurity. This is a solution, or one of the solutions. We need to continue to work on solutions, but this is one, to give direct aid to individuals, households, and businesses. We can't release the oil reserves. We can't increase the production here on Guam of oil. We can't all buy houses closer to our work, and we can't all go and buy new electric cars, as was suggested. This solution is available to us here on Guam. It's something we control, and it is available to us now. It was available to us in February, and it would save every consumer 25 cents per gallon for all consumers, no eligibility, no special forms, nothing. And the gas companies have said, and I'm reading from SPPC, South Pacific Petroleum Corporation, April 7, 2022, we believe that a reduction in liquid fuels tax, whether it is a total or part reduction, would be passed on to the consumer. The simple logic behind this broad statement is that the current marketplace fuel price determination is made, including the legislated requirement to collect and remit LFT on the volume sold to Guam's consumer. If the LFT no longer exists, it would not be included as a factor in our future price determinations. It would not exist. The change brought by the bills would not provide any benefit or assistance to our organization. However, it is likely to benefit Guam's consumers, even if only to a modest extent. IP&E, April 7, 2022. There are many worldwide factors beyond control which have been driving up costs for all consumers. In this regard, we support the proposed legislation which will reduce the liquid fuel tax in Guam and have the net effect to reduce costs for Guam consumers. As a collector and remitter of liquid fuel taxes, we are prepared to support and implement the proposed legislation. So it's a good shot that these savings are going to be passed on to consumers, and it's the best shot we have in front of us at this point. And we must make this permanent, because right now there is no one who is predicting that this is only a temporary trend, a temporary rise in gas prices. And CNN report said the last time the US saw record gas prices was in summer of 2008, and those prices stayed for 14 years. Until March, and since then, records have been shattered repeatedly, and they go on to describe why, the worldwide issues of affecting gas prices. And we've seen Congress struggle, we've seen states struggle, and this is one of the solutions that they are using. It's not perfect, but it is tangible and it is available. And this permanent solution will increase the trust of the consumers, our people. The testimony has shown that there will be no impact to any agencies, and the appropriations to these agencies for fiscal year 2022 remain intact. No source of funding is required according to their testimony, and that's the way they've handled special fund shortfalls over the years. But just to give some assurance to those who are still concerned and not in trust of the administration's ability to transfer or use their general fund to cover the shortfalls, I do have an amendment, Mr. Chair. I think it's been passed out. Line 8, page 6. Yes, it's to add the words $2,800,000 is hereby appropriated from the general fund excess revenues collected above the adopted levels of fiscal year 2022 to the Guam Highway Fund. $2.8 million from the general fund excess to the Guam Highway Fund.
The amendment is B261 TMT L8 P6, so that's line 8, page 6. Anyone on the amendment? Any objections to the amendment? Is there any objections? Signify by raising your hand. Seeing no objections, motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, have you completed your closing?
On the bill?
Yes, you may
Yes.
close.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I thank my colleagues for their concern about impacts to the agencies, about Guam's future. I share their concerns, but I assure them that this bill in no way is going to be the demise of Guam's future or of Guam's roads, unless we, as a legislature, cannot be the dedicated funding source. We are the dedicated funding source for road improvements on Guam. It can come from anywhere. It takes us and our willpower to do that. and to do that in every budget and every future legislature, to do that, and to prioritize roads, if that's what we want to do. And I have done that, and I support that, and I will continue to support that. And I cannot imagine that we cannot spare 2.8 million this year, in the next few months, out of 87 million. And I cannot imagine that we can't spare 8 million in FY23 and going forward, when we have had excess revenues every year for the last 5 years that we have not touched, but other people have touched, have used. And I'm saying we will use those, and let's use those now and give the relief to the people of Guam. Simple as that, instead of holding on and forcing them to continue to pay 8 million. Let me just remind us that when we raised this liquid fuels tax in 2018, that was because other taxes were decreased by act of Congress. Well, now we've got an increase in other taxes, and I say we give this back in relief to them. I think that's the least that we can do. It's not much. It's 23 cents per gallon. It's $8 million total. And it's the least that we can do to try to come to some immediate relief. I don't think it's the total solution, but I definitely think it's action today that is feasible, real. It's been promised. It's going to be given to the consumers. There's no reason for us to hesitate. We might not be reducing airfare, but this is not intended to reduce airfare. It's intended to reduce every single family's price of gas that they are using to get to work, to get to take care of their elderly parents, to get where they need to go. Again, we've seen the money that we have available, and I'm saying this relief is how we should use it. And this relief is something the legislature controls. We don't control the hundreds of millions of federal funds, but we control this. We can control this together, and we can give this relief. I want to thank my colleagues for their wise words. I want to thank the Guam Chamber for its continued advocacy, the people of Guam who've continued to weigh in on this, and it's something that I think they've been waiting for since at least February, but we all know way before then. And I ask that my colleagues support this bill today, and that we give this relief today, and that this is the very least that we could do, and that the permanency of this has far-reaching benefits. First of all, we can afford it. Second of all, it's going to give them trust that we are doing everything that we've got. We're giving it to them. What we have, we are going to give back. We only have because they gave it to us. These same people gave it to us. And now that they need it, it's our time to give it to them. I wish I could give more, Mr. Chair. Just Masi. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, before I close, I'd like to add co-sponsors, if possible.
You may proceed.
Thank you. I'd like to move to add Senator Sabina Perez, Senator Amanda Shelton, Senator James Moylan, Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Joanne Brown, any senator, and the other senators, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
So there's a motion to add Senators Perez. I'm sorry, can you repeat the senators' names again?
Perez, Shelton, Moylan, Duenas, Brown. Senator Taitagui, Senator San Agustin, doesn't want, but I hope all of them. Jesus Masi, Mr. Chair.
Any objections to the motion? Seeing no objections, motion carries.
Jesus Masi.
That has completed round 3 on substitute bill 261-36 LS. At this time, I'll recognize the speaker for a motion for a recommendation of the committee of the whole. If we can take a short recess. Moment's recess. Okay, we are back. Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I move to adopt a recommendation by the Committee of the Whole to place Bill 261-36 LS in the third reading file.
On that motion, any objections? Seeing no objections, motion carries.
Thank you.
We have now completed a discussion of Bill 261-36 LS. Next bill on the agenda is Bill 290-36 LS, introduced by Senator James Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, after discussion with the committee chair on Bill 290 and further discussion of what we're looking at with the rest of the agenda, I move to put 290 aside for now, with the understanding from the committee chair that we'll be having a public hearing on this bill here around July, earliest time frame of July, and therefore I'm looking forward to having the discussion on 295 at this time. So I wish to put aside 290 at this time, Mr. Chair.
There is a motion to set aside Bill number 290-36 LS. On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing no objections, motion carries. We're now on Bill number 295-36 LS as amended by the Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing, introduced by Senators Joe S. San Augustine, Tina Rose Munya-Barnes, Amanda L. Shelton, Jose Pito Terlahi, V. Anthony Atta, Frank Bloss Jr., James C. Moylan. An act to temporarily waive the levy of excise taxes, automotive surcharges, and mass transit automotive surcharges on liquid fuel for 180 calendar days, to amend subsection J1 of Section 1, Chapter 5 of Public Law 36-54 relative to the appropriations for the Department of Public Works, and to amend subsection DD1 of Section 1, Chapter 5 of Public Law 36-54 relative to the appropriations for the Guam Regional Transit Authority. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you be calling in the panel now so that I can introduce the bill and then we can go right into the discussion with the panel?
Yes, we can call on the panel first. I'll take a moment's recess while we assemble the panel.
Thank you.
We are back from recess now. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd only highly recommend you remind the panel that they were sworn in. We're just going to the next bill, just so they're reminded.
Yes, thank you, Senator San Augustine. For the record, the members of the panel have already been sworn in. We're just continuing the discussion with them now on Bill 295-36 LS. Senator San Augustine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for reading off the bill. I'll just jump right into the opening. The intent of this bill is to waive the payment of excess tax and surcharges such as the automotive surcharges, mass transit automotive surcharges, and all liquid fuel except for commercial aviation for 180 days. As this bill provides a moratorium on liquid fuel taxes, the government will absorb the liquid fuel tax to bring relief to our people, but will provide a supplemental appropriation to the Guam Highway Fund. The general fund will cover the shortfall of the Guam Highway Fund, which allow the government to continue to serve the people of Guam, such as providing funding for necessary road repairs and maintenance, accessible mass transit, and better public service. These past 2 years have been a roller coaster ride for our island and our people. The COVID pandemic has caused our island to suffer, and many of our people have experienced financial stress due to the hardship of losing their livelihood. As our economy recovers, cost of goods has risen due to the inflation and the global market being affected by geopolitical matters that is out of our control. Fuel prices have surpassed the $6 mark, almost reaching $7. We're heading in that direction. I hope we never get there. It is right and just that we provide our people this tax relief, as we continue to find ways that will assist with lowering the price of fuel locally. As for the amendments on this bill, it ensures to provide supplemental appropriation of both Department of Public Works and Guam Regional Transit Authority. The supplemental appropriation from the general fund to the Department of Public Works is $5 million, and for Guam Regional Transit Authority is $156,000. That may change because it was discussed earlier, less would be needed. These amendments are germane to the bill and is included in the fiscal note, which was verified by BBMR. This bill will also assist this body and the present administration the opportunity to assess the impact of the rising gas prices within the global market and find solutions on how we can alleviate the rising cost of gas locally for our people. I look forward to the discussion on this bill and hope for support of my colleagues on this measure. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator Blas, Senator Taitigui, Senator Perez, Vice Speaker, Senator Brown, Senator Moylan, Senator Torres, Senator Nelson.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm going to perhaps ask an absurd question, but I'm going to ask anyway. Is there a way that we are able to see the tax filing of the wholesalers and retailers without designating who they are, the numbers, as far as like their BPT or the impacts of the LFT?
I'm pretty sure we can give you numbers and just redact, you know, the names, but I would have to verify that information.
Is there a way that we can get that while we're debating this bill?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Nelson, I'm going to allow Senator San Augustine to have a point of information.
Just point of information, on wholesalers, they don't pay BBT. It's just a liquid fuel tax. So I think our question is in line, but I just wanted to be known that wholesalers don't pay GRT.
Right.
Wow, so, they don't even pay GRT?
It's the vendors pay the GRT.
That's correct. That's why I said BPT and LFT.
Okay.
And that's why I said vendors and wholesalers. Okay, so perhaps maybe like an analysis of the profit margins that that we can see?
You know, the problem is, you know, like we aren't privy to what happens between the wholesaler and the retailer, if I'm not mistaken. I don't, you know, like we don't get into what, you know, like what they buy it at and you know, so forth. So I don't know, that might be a little bit tricky.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe then we just look at the BPT for the vendors, the retailers, and then the liquid fuel tax for the wholesalers. Can we get those numbers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I believe it.
Because I'm thinking that correct me if I'm wrong, we only have one primary wholesaler coming in from Singapore, right? And then they distribute it amongst the different vendors, or do we have like Shell has a Shell wholesaler, Mobil has a Mobil wholesaler?
I believe it's the former, but I am not.
Okay, just one
I'm not
wholesaler.
sure. Yeah.
So can we get those?
Okay, let me see if I have the latest figures in front of me.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. I'd like to see the numbers. You know, it's imperative also that we're debating these bills, but we haven't really have the numbers for analysis, right? We're just looking at, okay, we know that this is going to, or we are hoping that this is going to defer the cost of gas at the pumps. But even though we have testimony saying that they will implement, there's no guarantee that you can manipulate the numbers to ensure that you still receive the same profit margins or even a greater profit margin as a business. And so, you know, I'm hoping that we can get like from 2000, for the past 5 years, really to see this type of analysis, like 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 2018 would be the 5-year mark. So go back from 2018 to 2022. Because we don't really have a clear understanding of how they're operating is you know, in this sense when we're looking at the numbers. And I think that will help us discern better and perhaps to make amendments to the bill to ensure that we're able to, that the consumer will able to be able to receive this 14-cent cost savings or whatever the liquid fuel tax rate is. So can we do that? Can we get those numbers from 2018 to 2022, please? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Madam Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The bill puts a hold on the liquid fuels tax, the same taxes described in the earlier bill, but for a period of 180 days. Mr. Burton or any of you, could you tell us the impact of the 180 days? How much is that? 6 months? We said it was 8 million for 1 year. So 6 months would be half. Is that 4 million? No, it's only, I don't know. Yes.
What we have in the fiscal note for the 180 days is 4.6.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Sorry. What we have in the fiscal note is that for the 180 days or 6 months was 4.6 million.
Okay, thank you. 4.6.
And that's because it's from, and we calculate it from April through September.
Okay.
We use those averages.
But the 6 months now will go beyond September, right? Okay. And, all right. I don't have any additional questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That will now conclude round one. Go ahead, Senator San Agustin.
So I would be the last one on the round one. I didn't ask, I only gave an opening. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to remind my colleagues that on the bill, when we identified the 6 months, so as we asked the question of how much the impact, on the bill it identifies that. And Mr. Byrne can verify that because that's why the bill identified on page 2, $5 million. And then as it goes down, I think it identifies also total of 140,000 for GRTA. So the amounts are there. If we were to adjust it from like the previous bill, of course the amount's going to go down. It's going to be 4.6, but when we're looking at 6 months based on what was presented, then it just comes up with a different number. And I think Mr. Byrne would be able to verify that. Based on the bill, it was geared towards a 6-month period, not just the remaining of this fiscal year. It's a 6-month period. Am I correct, Mr. Byrne? And maybe you can comment to that, because the bill has the numbers. And if the numbers change, then please advise so I can make the appropriate amendment to make the adjustment on the bill.
Yes, Senator, you're correct. My recollection of the public hearing, an estimate was done actually I think it was done by BBMR and DRT for the 180 days, and it came out at something around about 5 million, and that's the adjustment that's been put into here.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gary, the economist, could you please comment about I would say the benefits of a moratorium of this bill, the difference, or just the benefits of the moratorium where it's a measuring tool similar to, like I mentioned from the last bill, the minimum wage when we first passed it, it was supposed to happen in 2-year increments, and then there was an amendment to extend the moratorium on the passing of minimum wage to another year because we were measuring the economic impact. And with this moratorium, this bill, it actually allows us to measure what is the impact, and we need to extend it, or we need to find another solution to assist the people of Guam. Sir. Might be a hard question, but go for it.
Yeah, I think you just answered part of it. If you have it in place for a while, then you could get some assessment of the impact, and also the economic conditions might change over that time and the budget conditions, so you may reevaluate it.
All right, thank you.
Versus if it was permanent, it would most likely stay in place permanent, as permanent repeal would be hard to remove.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. That is the end of round 1 now. We will go on to round number 2. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to go back to some of the comments that we had on the other bill earlier, because we're still talking about liquid fuel tax as well. From IP&E, they made the statement, as a collector and a remitter of liquid fuel taxes, we are prepared to support and implement proposed legislation. So IP&E is basically, they're saying they collect it and then they give it to government of Guam. They don't profit from the liquid fuel tax. They have nothing. If it's removed, it's removed, no matter for 6 months or for 1 year. They have nothing to gain from the liquid fuel tax. They just have to collect it and then they give it to the government of Guam. SPPP says the change brought about by bills would not provide any benefit or assistance to our organization. Again, similar to like IP&E, they don't profit from this. ExxonMobil. Overall, we would support and implement the bill that passed on the basis that it seeks to reduce some of the tax burden on Guam fuel consumers. Like the other bill that we set aside, whether it be the BBT or the liquid fuel tax, these companies do not profit by these taxes. The ones that benefit, as these companies recognize, is the consumer. If we're going to think that the companies are going to reduce their prices, want to prove that they're reducing their prices from us removing their taxes, well, they never got this money anyway. right? It's just going to be removed as what they had to collect from the consumers. The ones that will benefit automatically once this is implemented is the consumer. So I just wanted to share that information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Torres. Senator Nelson.
I just have an amendment for the third round, Mr. Chair, but yes, the testimonies do exist saying that there is no profit, but just like in previous years when we've attempted to roll back the BPT, we didn't see a decrease in costs, right? So what's stopping me as a business owner? I mean, even the discussion nationally is that they're seeing 60% profit margins. So don't tell me there's no profit, or don't tell the people that there's no profit in this type of industry. I just hope that we get the numbers, Mr. Chair, so that we can understand. And if there is no profit and you feel like, you know, we want to be transparent, then let's be transparent and let's look at the books. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Go ahead and...
Okay, Senator Nelson, I hope this is what you are looking for. So we do have numbers for broken down from 2016 to 2021. So if it's okay with you, I'll just talk about 2021.
Okay.
So with regard to the liquid fuels tax on, you know, just the regular gasoline plus the 4 cents, then you are looking at a total of approximately $6 million, just a little over $6 million. Now, with regard to BPT, and I believe this data was provided to Senator Moylan for his bill. Okay, it says here, sorry. Oh, I know, but she wanted to know the BPT information, Madam Chair. So just really quickly, so on the BPT side, you know, assuming, of course, we know that this is likely not going to happen, but it says assuming there are no future increases in the price of gasoline, the estimated annual impact on BPT is $10.9 million to $13.7 million. Assuming future increases, and let's see, and this is following the trend that was from May 6, 2020 through April 12, 2022. The estimated annual impact in year one is $15.4 million to $19.3 million. If it's at, you know, if it goes higher, and that's assuming a 41% increase from the base. If it's at 82%, then the estimated annual impact is $19.9 million to $25 million.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, I forgot what I was going to say.
Thank you. Chalahi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to find something I had earlier, but frankly, I support this bill. It's going to give relief as well. It's going to give relief in the same amount, 23 cents per gallon. Its only limitation is that it's only giving this relief for a limited period of time, 180 days. But other than that, I think I've had all my questions answered as to the impact to the government of Guam. If you could just confirm the funding source, Mr. Byrne, the impact is 4.6 or $5 million, and we are covering that with what?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's set forth in the bill.
Right.
The 4.6 million, which is an estimate of the taxes foregone, is covered by, in this bill, an appropriation of 5 million from the general fund, and I believe it's 140,000 from the public transit fund.
Not from, to, right? From the general fund
There's,
to the,
well, it's in three parts.
Yes.
The first, the summary of appropriation funding source is 5 million from the general fund. And then there's a paragraph that relates to GRTA, which shows a little, about another couple of 100,000 from the general fund, and a reduction to 140,000 of the public transit fund.
thank you. Totaling 5 million from the general fund, right?
Generally, it's 5 million,
All
yes.
right. And this is for, it says to affect Public Law 3654, so that means the FY22 budget, right?
Yes.
But we're going, with 180 days, we'll be going beyond the FY22 budget, so it's a little bit off, but I don't have an issue with that at this point. I feel like we can figure that out when we do the FY23 budget, how to fix that adjustment. But Mr. Hiles, do you see any indication that fuel prices, again, the trend is going to go down at the end of 180 days?
That's, there's so many factors involved that's very difficult to predict, and I won't make a prediction. In fact, it wasn't very long ago that we did see a temporary reduction in fuel prices.
Right.
And then I thought, oh, good, that's the end of it. And then it started boomeranging.
Right.
So I wouldn't make a prediction on
Thank you, Mr. Hiles.
6 months.
And again, Mr. Chair, thank you again. I support the bill. I just, again, it's only for 180 days, and I think that's the only shortfall of this bill. Otherwise, the bill gives the exact relief that we can give, and the maximum amount for this period. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We'll go now to the back row, Senator Titagui. Senator Bloss, if we can go to you, I'll go back to Senator Titagui. Senator Bloss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along the lines of the concerns of the previous speaker, Mr. Byrne, the proposal before us here says a moratorium on the fees for 180 days. If there was a proposal to increase it to by another 180 days, what would that impact be?
You're asking me to estimate?
Yeah, just estimate it.
I've no reason to believe it wouldn't be another 4.6 to 4.8
Okay.
million.
Mr. Hiles, I guess, what is a better indicator for the impact economic-wise? Would it be 180 or 360?
Mathematically, 360 is double of 180.
Yeah.
So it would be twice as long. And I would expect that the cost would be just approximately twice as much.
but with regards to assessing the impact as an economist, which scenario would you rather do your study on, 180 or 360 days?
Well, the 360 would have the same monthly impact, but for twice as long.
So do you see any benefit in it?
Sure, the benefit to the people that are buying gas is that the gas prices would be lower for a longer period of time, but the cost would be whatever other revenue source was used to replace.
Okay. What if I was to change the equation in this and basically say a moratorium until such time the cost of fuel goes below a certain point? From anybody.
Could you restate the question one more time?
If the moratorium was based on the length, not so much a length of time of 180 days, but the moratorium was based on the possibility of, okay, this moratorium stays in place until the cost of fuel goes below a certain mark.
Well, that, to me, Senator, that would be an indeterminate amount, because we would not know, and no matter how good our forecasting is, I don't think we're in the position to forecast such a
and the
thing.
reason why I'm bringing this up, Mr. Byrne, is, you know, the value of this, this, you know, committee of the whole, this table discussion is just throw all the ideas out there, okay? And let's digest it a little bit, and let's think of all the different possibilities. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying what if, okay? You know, and then just, you know, what I appreciate about this conversation is the spontaneity and the response, so that it is, you know, as much as we, you know, we want to digest it, we still have to come. We feel compelled to bring a response, and that's probably sometimes the best response to be able to provide at the moment. So, not to fear that it's that it's in fact going to happen. It's just putting it out there as a possibility. Okay, so don't worry. I'm just asking. Okay.
Well, I see the merit of the suggestion, but it's kind of a budgetary nightmare.
Understood.
And that might not be what the body wants to do.
And in all fairness, you know, I understand that you know, you have the responsibility of being able to track things and everything. So, in fairness to both you and Mr. Hiles, I just wanted to, okay, you know, let's see how we can fashion a piece of legislation that, you know, truly works and doesn't break the bank, if you will. Okay. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator Titlegy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question to Llewellyn from OFB. On the numbers here, you know, we're assessing a 6-month period that was mentioned earlier of how much funding will be lost in the Guam Highways Fund, right? And we made appropriations for FY22 for certain agencies to receive funding. And then on the Guam Regional Transit Authority, it looked like you were able to increase there because of the loss that may happen there. Is that correct?
Yes, correct, Senator. With the liquid fuel, the bill, it not only puts a moratorium on the liquid fuel taxes part, but the surcharges. So
As well,
the public transit fund receives a portion, or receives the portion of the surcharge from diesel.
Okay. So what happens is that what you're doing is, I think in here, is trying to adjust for 6 months. Now, we're going to be ending FY22. So would this mean that whatever excess revenue, any lapses for them to be carried over into FY23? Because it looks like you're funding them for the 6 months loss in here, correct? And it only talks about FY22, to allow them to use whatever funding for 20, you know where I'm going at this one, right, Luella?
Yeah,
How can we address that? Or is it addressed in the bill to allow them to utilize this additional revenue, which has been calculated for 6 months, but we're only going to, how much longer do we have? July, August, September, October? No, we only have about 3 months left, right?
So the bottom line is they're still getting the same appropriation amount, but it's just the offset. So I guess when this fiscal note was written, it was for the 6 months, again, starting April through September. Now there's only really 3 months left, really, for this fiscal year, so it would have to be adjusted. But their bottom line, they're still getting the same bottom line appropriation. It's the offset of general fund versus the Guam Highway Fund or the Public Transit Fund.
Okay, so will we have to make some kind of, okay, in the budget bill, when we address the budget bill, we're going to have to make some kind of adjustment then? We're allowing the...
For FY23, yes, we have to consider that the next 3 months. But this bill also, I guess, because it's factoring the offset, it offset the 4.6 million, which we used again. We were considered April through September of this fiscal year, but there's really only, again, three more months left of the fiscal year.
Right.
So that impact of the reduction in Guam Highway Fund is probably going to be half of that.
Exactly. So how do we adjust this? Because, we're giving the full 6.
We do have to, in my opinion, update the numbers because the impact is not going to be the complete 5 million. And
is there any language that's going to be needed in this legislation to ensure that it allows it to go into FY23?
it just says for 180 days. I don't believe the bill says just for 2022. So this is just trying to cover what's going to happen, what the shortfall that we estimated for 2022.
Okay.
But we could still factor the rest of the 3 months in 2023 when we prepare the budget.
Which we will take that in consideration during the budget time?
Yeah.
So footnote on those particular DPW as well as GRT, right? Okay, so I can rely on you to remember that part when we go into budget. If I don't remember, I'm sure you will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. Senator San Agustin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleagues, I had the Assistant Legislative staff pass out some information that was normally provided in the committee report so that everyone can see what the liquid fuel tax, liquid fuel by kind of tax. Something that DRT was trying to comment, but by providing this, I think it kind of cuts the chase on having DRT trying to find the information. But as one of my colleagues brought up, if we were to extend the moratorium to more than the 180 days, it's just ×2. But we need to always remind ourselves, my colleagues, that we are going into the budget session. During this 180 days, we are going to discuss how we're going to ensure in FY 2023 we fund the shortfall or the funding that needs to be here. This bill may say $5 million, yes, that has to impact our budget for 2023. If there's an increase, we will be in discussion to ensure it's funded. We're not going to let DPW not run the buses and fix roads. We're not going to allow GRT to not run their buses. We're not going to allow certain agencies to not get the funding that they should get. Because also during our discussion right now in our budget, we're talking about already trying to remove, which has been addressed by the OPA on many of its audits, that liquid fuel tax highway fund should go to the appropriate agency, which is DPW. And that's what we're addressing right now. We've even discussed this and it supports GRTA, but we've also discussed this with the Mayor's Council to not fund them anymore so they're not getting an OPA report saying, you shouldn't be getting highway fund. You shouldn't be using it that way because you're not doing what it was intended. So we're already addressing that in the Committee of Appropriation. So by already looking into that factor, if there is an amendment to go beyond 180 days, my colleague that mentioned that, he's part of my committee. He was going to be in the discussion when we talk about the numbers, where we're going to fund it, how we're going to fund it, and how we're going to make it work. The goal is we got to make things work, not go against the system. The system is there for us to fix or make sure it stays afloat. So with that, Mr. Chair, I don't have any comments. No question. I just want to give a comment to that. And if there's any amendment to increase the number of months other than 180 days, like Mr. Hiles says, 360 days is normally better, that might be an amendment that a couple of my colleagues had brought to my attention. And all you do is do the ×2. Every time you add 6 months, times whatever, and we move from there. But at least, like Mr. Burns says, you have to have a specific number of days so that we know what we're calculating. To have an indefinite number is, ooh, that's scary. That's the unknown. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator Brown. Vice Speaker. Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want some clarification on the bill regarding the source of the money. So in the bill, it states that $5 million from the general fund. So is it limited just to fiscal year 2022? Or are we dipping into the 2023 general fund monies? This is a question for OFB.
From my reading, it just discusses 2022. From my reading, it just discusses 2022 general fund. But of course, when it's going to affect, like we said, again, another 3 months in 2023. So we will cover that when we prepare the FY 2023 budget.
Okay. So where is this money coming from within the 2022 budget to offset the reduction?
In the general fund for 2022. That's the way
But
it
wasn't
reads.
that all appropriated?
But we do know there's excess revenues collected currently.
Oh, so we're talking about the excess funds.
I mean, because like you're correct, the budget act currently, we appropriate all the general fund.
Okay, so then shouldn't it say surplus or excess monies collected versus the general fund? Because the way it reads is that we'll be taking it from another agency.
Someone else will be shorted. So the revenue portions at the beginning of the budget act will probably have to reflect this additional general fund, which will come from the excess that's being collected now.
Okay. Is there
everything to balance.
Is there amendment needed for this then?
I think to balance the FY 2022 budget, that should be
There
considered.
should be an amendment.
Because again, the general fund revenue, it's saying general fund, but all the general fund we projected for the FY 22 budget has been appropriated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll work with the sponsor.
Right.
Thank you. I guess a question for the OFB again. So in regards to Section 6 of the bill, so it shifts money from the public transit fund over to the general fund without, I guess, changing the overall amount that was appropriated. Is that correct?
It shifts from the general fund to, because the reduction in the public transit fund, it's offsetting that with the general fund.
Okay, so it's increasing the general fund portion, but
Correct.
decreasing the public transit fund. So I know in the fiscal note it said there wasn't, the bill does not address the potential impacts. Yes, so perhaps this question is for Ms. Nicholas. Did you have plans for the amount of money that was originally appropriated based on the 2022 budget? That was at $297,483.
Addressing your question, yes, we do have plans, but the plans are all in order, and I do not have the details of the plans that are in order.
So would it be impacted by the decrease?
No,
the
it will
plans
not.
that you have?
No, it will not.
Okay, so this public transit fund, what is it used for?
Well, the bill does not The bill does not negatively impact GRTA, and it will not create a potential impact to our agency. The entire impact of the liquid fuel taxes of the $5 million, which was addressed by the $5 million general fund appropriation to the
I'm sorry, Ms. St. Nicholas, can you speak into the mic? It's
Oh.
hard to hear. Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, that we do have plans that's appropriated for the 200-some thousand. Everything is in order, and what the plans are, I'm not able to furnish the details at this point.
Okay, so this reduction does not affect
No, it
your
doesn't.
operations?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you, Senator Perez. That concludes round 2. We will take a short recess to dismiss the members of the panel before we move on to round 3. Again, round 3 will be for any amendments or closing statements on the bill. We will take a recess now.